we do ourselves. And today we promised ourselves the second lecture, and which is the lecture from John number 1, and that is very important for the Christian community, and but for us here for ecology, so for eco-theology, as we call that, which the three Abrahamic religions have in common. So, but not this one. This one is a specifically Christian one. Therefore, the Jews and the Muslims don't have that in common. Oh, I lost that somewhere?
Yes.
Where did I lose it?
I don't know. It was behind you, so now
Really?
it's next to you.
Oh my God, this is not good. Okay, let me just find this John here. Okay, so it is John chapter number 1, and there the last time we talked about this first chapter of the Genesis, the creation, the mythos of the creation. God made man master of this creation of his. He said all the time that the creation is good, and the master, of course, has to preserve it. There's God's providence, there's man's providence for the animals, for the plants, and for the water and the air. So we are responsible. That would be an eco-theology beginning. And then there is another one here. I have to take this here until I have my operation. In the beginning was the Word, that is the Logos. The Word was with God, and the Word was God. He was with God in the beginning. Through him all things came to be. So everything, the plants and everything, was created through the Logos. Through him all things came to be. Not one thing had its being but through him. All that came to be had life in him, and that life was the light of man, a light that shines in the dark, a light that darkness could not overpower. A man came, sent by God, and that is John, but we want to jump over this. The Word was the true light that enlightens all men. That is where the concept of enlightenment comes from. And he was coming into the world, he was in the world. That had its being through him, and the world did not know him. He came to his own domain, and his own people did not accept him. But to all who did accept him, he gave power to become children or sons of God, to all who believe in the name of him who was born not out of human stock or urge of the flesh or will of man, but of God himself. The Word was made flesh, he lived among us, and we saw his glory, and the glory that is his as the only Son of the Father, full of grace and truth. So if the Pope enters the public sphere, it talks about ecology. He talks from this presupposition that God created the Word, but he created, and that is John then, God created the Word through the Logos, and the Logos became flesh in order to restore things. Something has gone wrong with that good world, and it has to be restored. So that is another eco-theological motivation for what we are about here. So in our first discourse, we explained the word ecology. We showed all the different, and you can see that because I have it in there again. We looked at the different meanings. Oikos, the house. That house can be our body, it can be our family home, it can be the nation, and it can be the whole human species on this little planet on which we sit. We had pictures yesterday of the planet. Hi, Walter! Wonderful, you are here.
Yes.
That is great.
Yes.
Happy Valentine's Day.
Yes. Valentine's.
I saw the little planet Titan, and it looks like the Earth. There are methane lakes, oceans, methane oceans. It's very cold.
Methane.
Methane oceans. And it looks like Italy, like America and so on, the continents, and then there are these methane lakes in there. So we sit on a little thing like this. And you can say the whole globe on which we sit, that is our oikos, our house. Or economy means we have to obey the laws of this house. Otherwise, the house goes kaput. And so that was our point the last time. And we don't have to go through all this again. And we had some time diagnosis, but now we continue here. So in our first discourse, we explained the word ecology, oikology. We looked at the different forms of it. We stressed eco-theology and eco-morality. So we said how unbelievably complex that is. You have here two books from my beloved New Society and the Frankfurt Journal, and they're all on ecology. The energy turn, that means with Japan, with this catastrophe, the Europeans think to get rid of their atomic energy complexes. The Germans closed up 8 already. They have 17 altogether, so that would be 9 more have to go. But before that, they have to put along the Baltic Sea and so on, all the windmills, in order to get wind energy, water energy, and then particularly also these plates where the sun energy is stored and caught and so on. And there are storage problems for this energy, like batteries and so on. There is the transport of this energy in networks there, which go through the landscape, and and there are the banks, and there is investments, and the jobs lost, and the jobs gained afterwards, and the resistance of the labor unions, and so on and so on. Then it must all be profitable, otherwise you don't get the capitalistic bastards into the whole thing. So you have to make them earn something. You have to show that windmills are profitable, and so on. So it is an unbelievable network of things. And eco-theology and eco-ethics is, of course, only a small part of that, on which we concentrate, because for the moment this is our perspective here. But we have to look at the other things as well. And all the sciences are involved, of course. There's biology. Ecology belongs to biology. And there's chemistry, of course. We are all stardust, so are the chimpanzees and so on. We are somewhat between the chimpanzees and the orangutans. They studied the sexual parts, and the chimpanzee sexual parts are bigger than ours, and the orangutans are smaller. So our ancestor must somehow be in between. The missing link is still missing, but somewhere in between. So that's where we come from, and therefore what I want to start out with today is a timeline that we see a little bit where this ecology problem comes up. Because it wasn't there all the time, of course. That is important for us to know, to have a time perspective when this problem really came to us and to see the genesis of it. So let's try that for a moment. The ecology problem is new. The timeline of the universe shows us how new the ecological problem is. So just a few numbers here. Here are a few dates of our human timeline. The universe is 13 billion years old. Maybe some say 14. So 14 to 13 billion. This is almost an immeasurable number, of course, in terms of that, these years or so. But in comparison with other dates, it shows us something. So the dinosaurs died out 250 million years ago. So the universe was going on already for 12 billion or whatever years, and then only then came the dinosaurs, which were very successful for a long time. They could swim, they could walk on land, and they could fly. Thanks be to God, that means to providence, they died out. There you can see that the negative is also the positive. So one theory assumes that an impact of a comet in the Caribbean produced a cloud around the whole globe, which darkened it all, and it lasted maybe 5 years. And during these 5 years, 75% of the vegetation and animals died out on this globe. There is what can happen to the oikos, to our house in which we sit. That is the problem. These comets are flying around us all over the place. Many of them are invisible. NASA is hunting them, to see them, to inspect them. Some come very close, zip, go by. Others are in greater distance and so on. But they're always there, and at any moment, practically, one of them could hit. On the size, how big it is, it depends what the variation of the catastrophe would be. So they already 250 million years, long before we came. Jurassic Park now brings those people back from 250 million years ago and put them into the present. And there is a movie on the Jurassic Park almost every night. So where they somehow take material out of the bones which are left, which we find in the sand or the ocean, and then they try to revive them again, and this is a catastrophe, of course. Now, man is about, some people say 1.5 million years old. That is a little loosey, which our anthropologists found. But in the meantime, since Lucy, many people think that we are really 4 million years old. So it depends, you know, from the time when we walked upright, which was very hard to overcome the law of gravity, and to get the hands free, not to walk on the hands, and to make them more flexible, and then, so that was, let's see, 4 million years old. We are here in that house, in that oikos, for 4 million years. And for the longest time, there was no ecological problem whatsoever. That means we fit still very nicely into the natural environment. We somehow separated ourselves from, but it didn't disturb the, what is called the ecological balance, important word, ecological balance between our organism and our environment, the other plants, the other mammals, and so on. And that is true even when the hunting started, when the fishing started, and the food gathering started, which was long before 10,000 years ago. So the Homo sapiens is, and that is a very arrogant type of a word, we are all, of course, with the plants and so we are all stardust. That means chemistry is the first, and I think the last time I gave you this, this road map there, and on the road map that makes it a little bit clear, the different things. Now I hope I find it here. Do you find it? See, here I have it. So when you look at the road map A there, you see nature, and there's the mechanical realm. These are the bodies moving around, the billions of bodies there. And then you have the physical chemical realm. So chemistry is important as far as the dust is concerned, and the clouds which finally become firmer and firmer, and then you have the sun bodies and billions of suns, of course, and they particularize themselves into planets, and then the planets into moons. And so that is the physical chemical realm, and then the biosphere. Now, what we are talking about is the biosphere. That means the loss of plant species, the loss of animal species. Daily we lose thousands of species which we haven't even known, which go under. So that is the ecological problem now. And we have to see where it starts, the genesis, in order to get to the roots of this problem. And not just on the surface and say, we have to get our own house in order. For instance, I tightened the walls to that and the doors so that the heat doesn't go out and the cold heat doesn't come in. And I have two energy producers, gas, both of them. I went from oil to gas and so on. All these things we can do in the back. I planted a lot of trees for the squirrels and for the birds and for the little chipmunks and so on and so on. And I have a very good relationship to them, very harmonious one. So I have a little squirrel who sleeps with me, outside, sits outside on the porch there and eats. He has stored in his basement under the porch little seeds, and he eats them up there with two hands. He eats, sits upright, and when he's finished, falls asleep. So we sleep at the same time. He comes every day between 1 and 2 or 3 or so and does the same thing. So there's a very great harmony between them. They have their love games now all over the trees. There are these blackbirds suddenly learning, landing, and that is a very interesting thing, what their relationship is, who hunts whom. Sometimes the little squirrel runs after the black guys and they run away, and sometimes the squirrel runs away from the others. But I think the two species are indifferent to each other. Most species are indifferent to each other. That means they are neither, when you look at an organism, he has an enemy, he has food supply, he has a cave in which he lives. So therefore, most of the species around the animal organisms are not enemies and are not food, and so therefore they are indifferent. They are just moving by each other and are not interested in this. It is as if they were in their psyche particularized and would have 4 environments: the cave there, and the prey, and then the enemy. So 3 maybe. There must be a 4th one. I forgot it. So whatever does not fit into these 3 or 4 categories is of indifference for an organism. So nevertheless, this is this biosphere there, which is really threatened. And with this biosphere is also threatened the human organism. That means not our psyche, but that what belongs to nature. And the organism has three in it, or three elements, three moments in the process. And one is our form, the body form, with the brain and the heart and so on. And the other one is the assimilation process, with my eyes, with my ears and so on. When we went upright, we changed from the smelling thing to the eyes. Because when we were on four legs, we smelled like the animals, like the dogs and the cats and so on. But when we went upright, the nose went backward. I mean, not the nose, the smelling sense went backward, retarded, and the eyes became stronger. There are only a few species who have sharp eyes. The dogs are blind little creatures and so on, but the birds have sharp eyes, and some of the apes have sharp eyes, but we otherwise have only a few. The others don't see very well. Instead of seeing, they smell very far away. They can smell the enemy, the danger, and they can smell prey and can hunt after it. And then we have the genus process, and we have that in common with all other organisms in the biosphere. So we have this body form, we have the assimilation process, a theoretical one by seeing, smelling, hearing, and so on, and a practical one by grabbing, eating it up with our teeth, swallowing, and so on. And then number three, we have the genus process. That is particularly sexuality. And with sexuality is the transport of the genome. And therefore, it is also the possibility of mutation. That means, for instance, women choose always people with a long penis or with big muscles and so on. And through this process of selection, which has something to do with adaptation, that is transferred through the genome and changes slowly the form as well. Now, if you assimilate too much, you get too round or whatever. So all these moments hang together. There is a step, a threshold from the form to the assimilation, from the assimilation to sexuality. People take somebody out to eat, and afterwards they have sex. So to the genus process also belongs, besides sex, then illness, old age, and death. When an organism has reached its highest peak, that is when it has doubled itself up. When the children are born and the children are raised, which is very short in the animal kingdom, with us it's very long. But the more primitive, that means the less differentiated the organism is, the shorter is the time after procreation. That means some animals die even in the act of procreation. So a spider or so, with a big other spider, female spider maybe bigger, he just fertilizes her and falls off and is dead. In others, more complicated organisms, there is some time between procreation and death. And during this time, an organism can get sick, the organism becomes old, disintegrates slowly, and then dies. So that goes through the whole biosphere, and that goes also includes the human organism. And when the Pope in Berlin talked about the ecology of man, he consciously included man's body. So man's body is an ecological problem, because what we assimilate, like my wife died from cancer, thousands of people died from cancer in this town, because we had 17 paper mills who ruined the whole Kalamazoo River and the whole groundwater. And when people in any form take that in, that will bring cancer into their organism. Now, we knew this, and the federal government gave Western $1 million in order to find the culprits who were responsible for the pollution of this whole area. And Western identified them. And then they should be brought to court. Western was supposed to bring those owners of these paper mills, which produced already the communist opposition downtown between the two wars and so on, bring them to trial. And then they were supposed to be sentenced by money punishments. And with this, the American Army, or the Corps of whatever, these guys who are responsible in the
Army Corps of Engineers.
Was supposed to clean up the Kalamazoo River, because it is full of little frogs with one arm or with one leg and so on, massively. So, but the bastards moved out of town, and there's no paper mill left, or one or two left, or whatever. All the others either dissolved or went to another state. And all the money the government spent was for nothing. Western could not hang them, therefore did not get the money, therefore the Corps of Engineers couldn't clean the river. So we still have the same situation, and for this, people were there. That's what's called pollution, right? Pollution is only one element in ecology, ecology. Okay, so it's the biosphere and the human organism where the problem is situated. So we may leave this for a moment, and I want to go on here with this thing there. So we have this time diagnosis. Where are we there? So we said the 4 million years, we said 200,000 years Homo sapiens, so that is a very short time when you think of being here already for 4 million years. Before that we had the Homo erectus. That was a very, Walter, did you want to say something? Or
No, just say
no.
hello.
Homo erectus, that means this unbelievable thing where something forced us to go upright. And it was particularly about the assimilation process. We were on trees, jumped around there and so on. And then we went out into the prairie in order, because there wasn't any food in there, the food was out there. One always follows the money trail, one follows the food trail. And so we went out there and we had to stand up in order to look for enemies and for prey above the savanna grass. And with this moving up from one generation to the other, it became easier and easier, and our whole anatomy changed, particularly women's anatomy. The sexual organs of the woman moved forward. Somehow the lips and the tongue became symbolical for the vagina and for the penis, and so the somehow females seem to prefer this frontal type of encounter, and so slowly the whole process went that way, that having sex from behind is animal. You have to have the missionary position, that's the only good position. And it's not only the missionaries, it was 10,000 years before the missionaries that this slow evolution took place between the genders in the evolutionary process. So then we come 200,000 years old, then 10,000 years ago, where there were already everywhere farmers. There were fishermen. So when you see people fishing there, they do something which is very archaic. So are the hunters. The more evolved people, like Hitler, for instance, had a deep contempt for Goering, who would go hunting. That is something primitive, which a real evolved person is not doing anymore. Hunting, fishing, or food gathering, that's also done. Women may still go into the forest and get little berries from the bushes and so on. That beautiful movie, what is it called, the Golden Pond or so, they still go into the forest from the summer house and pick little strawberries or whatever. So, but that is left over. That is an archaic, primitive way to assimilate. Evolved people are not doing this anymore. But 10,000 years ago, now, then something changed. Agriculture came about. And with this came about work, which people hate. And with this work came about civilization. And with civilization, the repression of instinct, the forcing people to work. That means to have slaves, to have serfs, and to have wage laborers. Behind my classroom, I have a big tractor and workers with it, and I can all describe these things that describe the whole process, this whole economic process of controlling nature in the name of assimilation. The tractor, the nature, the man sitting on this, the capitalist who is not there, who is going swimming in Miami, they do his work, he gets the surplus, where it's all there. So, but that is the result of a long evolution and revolution to a large extent. So when Jesus attacks private property was already 10,000 years old. And when you have people getting accustomed to having their own thing, their own wife, their own car, their own house and so on, then to say, you know, you have to share this is horrible. So you understand why this young man who comes to Jesus and says, Jesus wants to join him in his kingdom, and he says, well, you have to fulfill all the laws first. And he says, I have all the 10 Commandments, I have fulfilled them. Jesus says you have to do one thing, you have to sell everything what you have. The destruction, that is Jesus' polemical, Jesus' revolutionary Haggadah and Halakha. And the young man is very sad because he cannot give it up. But Jesus himself was caught up in the poverty because he did not notice that the young man lied. He said, I have fulfilled all the laws. That means I have not stolen. You cannot be rich without stealing. It's out of the question. You cannot become rich by your own work. So, but Jesus lets it go. That means he assumed that the guy could be rich without having stolen, and without having killed for stealing, and without having lied about having stolen and about having killed. So, that nevertheless, when we see this timeline, we understand things a little bit better. How difficult it may be, or why it is as it is. So 200,000 years. Then we have farmers the first time. With the farmers comes work, because you don't now go with your camels there. I always ask my Saudi Arabian students, did they move the camels from the runway there before you landed? Yes, they do this all the time. They take me seriously. Talk about the camels and stuff. But when they were running around in the desert with the camels, then of course they didn't have to work. They let everything fall, all the dirt, and then the wind took care of it, and when God willing it rained, it was seldom enough, then the rain took care of the whole thing. So there was no work. And you have that today because all your children go through the whole evolutionary process. So there's a time when you have to teach them to pick things up. And that is very hard. What I did, I threw things out of the window in order to educate my children. But I was only half successful in this whole thing. 4 of them became orderly. No, only 3 of them became orderly. 4 of them had a hard time to step from the evolution of the nomad to the farm situation where everything has to be picked up. That means cultivated. And so one theory of anti-Semitism is a very, I don't know if the right one, the rabbis always said there is no theory, but he doesn't want to get rid of anti-Semitism, I think, out of some reason. But nevertheless, anti-Semitism could arise from why it is so consistent through Babylonia, through Egypt, through the Roman Empire, through the Greek Empire, through the medieval empire. Everybody hated those poor little Hebrews, Jews, or what, Semites. So the reason may be that they either didn't want to stop to be nomadic, or they couldn't. Nevertheless, while we had already Mesopotamia and we had Egypt, they moved around in these agricultural societies with their damn camels and didn't do any work. And they looked like being eternally on vacation. That means not working, while the others had to sweat already on their fields and put the plants in and wait for the rain and then do the harvest and all that hard work, that discipline, which pressured on the instinct, on the instinctual apparatus in our organism, and this apparatus rebels against work. People are lazy somehow. Everybody has a lazy bone in himself. And the rich, of course, always say that the poor are lazy. Why are you on the north side? Because you're so damn it lazy. You don't work. You lose all that time. Oh, are we too loud? Are you with us?
The class for oncology?
Yes.
Oh.
Come, join us.
I'm late, but I wanted to come.
Wonderful. Yes, you represent the great gender part, which is missing here.
You missed the best part.
No, you did not miss it. No, you came in time. Welcome to the club. Very good. So, nevertheless, so it may be possible that...
Oh, what is this?
Do you still have one there?
You have another one?
No, I don't have another one. So it may be that work being so hard and seeing other people who are not working, that this is the main theme of anti-Semitism, which then has variations. So the Egyptians didn't want to eat with the Hebrews because they didn't smell good or whatever. That may be a variation. And the Emperor Hadrian, who was a Stoic, when he saw a Jew who greeted him, he would say, how can this damned Jew greet me? And kill him. Then another Jew came and he greeted him, and that man would say, how can that damned Jew greet me? So whatever the Jew did, greeting or not greeting, they hated their guts. And so the prejudice remained up to Hitler, always they are not working. And therefore did not have an ecological problem either, as we would see now. So because these people running around with camels, they didn't have that problem yet. So the Hebrews didn't have a camel, and this produced great problems because you know that for 40 years of their punishment, for their not trusting providence, they had to go 40 years through the desert. You cannot go through the desert without camels. And the camel was not yet tamed, so therefore we have a problem. We will see also that the city of Jericho was founded in 6,800, and when the Moses came by 1200, and Joshua sent the spies to the walls of Jericho, there were no walls anymore. They had already fallen 1,000 years earlier, and the prostitute who sit on the wall could not sit on the wall because there wasn't any wall. And when the Joshua marched into the city and broke, and the trumpets went and the wall fell, it couldn't fall because he had fallen away. You see what the timeline produces all kinds of problems for reading the Torah or reading the Holy Quran or whatever. So, but we have to take that into consideration. We have to get to the truth. And if science has found something, evidence and so on, and it's firmly established like evolution and so on, then faith has to yield. But that is another rule. So let's see the farmers now. And 10,000 years ago, Jericho was founded, as we said, in 6,800. So the villages slowly come into city-states. So all the things, Nineveh was a city-state, Sodom was a city-state. There were 5 city-states around the Dead Sea. They had a king, they had a priesthood. They had already, what we will come to now, we are coming closer and closer to the ecological problem. These city-states had no civil society for hundreds of years. That means there was only the family, the kinship group, and then was the state, the king. And there was nothing in between. So when you look at Antigone in Greece, Antigone, as you know, had these 2 brothers. One brother fought against the city, and the other brother fought for the city. The king, the state, ordered that the brother who fought for the city will get an honorable burial. The brother who fought against the city was to be left to the birds. And there was Antigone. And she did not follow the law of the state, but the law of the netherworld, the law of the family, of the oikos of the family. So you have the split of the house into the state and into the family. You have that conflict up to us when Vietnam soldiers were shipped in the airplane to Vietnam to fight there. Their mothers very often came to the airport and pulled the boys out of the plane. See, that is the struggle of the mother, of the law of the netherworld, so to speak. The patriarchal gods are in sky. The matriarchal gods are in the depth below. And there was this conflict between the family and the state, and there was no civil society yet, and there was no ecological problem yet. That is important for us for the timeline, when that comes in. When Fromm talks so much about the matriarchy, and so on, then because the matriarchy had a different attitude toward the environment, toward the animals, toward the plant, and so on. More communicative, more mimetic, like the relationship of the mother to the child, or the relationship which the genders have when they fall in love with each other. So you can see that when a woman goes to the doctor and she is pregnant again the second time, he says, I told you you should get on the pill, and so on. And that is instrumental rationality. That is functional rationality. That is control of nature. It's control of the nature outside and the control of the woman's body and the man's body and so on. That's what we call rational. That's what we call positivism. Pope made an attack against positivism, and we will have to talk that a little bit later. So, on the other hand, there is this matriarchal thing, communicative rationality, mimetic rationality. The tribes, when they are in magic and fetishism, they imitate, mimetic, they imitate nature in their dances. They imitate the birds by playing their, like if they had wings. They move like the fish, they move like the tiger or the lion and so on. So there is a mimetic relationship to nature which has died out with us. That has something to do with our problem. We are not imitating nature's there and learn from it, but we have an objective relationship with it. We separate subject and object, and we want to get that damn it object, this nature, under control. Therefore, this big machine behind my windows and so on, which digs and tears into the sand and into the rock and whatever little worms or whatever is down there, it all has to die in that grabbing there. This is the Western attitude that has become characteristic for the Western civilization, and it is very one-sided. So this instrumental rationality and another rationality. The doctor says to that woman, you are irrational. I told you to go on the pill. Take the damn chemistry and control your ovulation and so on. And then the woman would say, but love has to be spontaneous. Love cannot be regulated this way. That is a completely different mentality. It's the matriarchal mentality, which has been repressed, which has become unconscious. The psychoanalysts like Fromm try to bring it into the open again. Okay, so then we have the development now of high cultures and high civilizations. And with this, and Freud discovered that come all kinds of problems because of the instinctual apparatus, our self-preservation, our libidinous instinct, our aggressive instinct, and all that has to be repressed in order to make civilization possible. So we have these first civilizations coming up there, and we have, I make that very short, about 5,000 years ago. So 10,000 years ago, villages start, then city-states start. With this comes also then the development of civil society. So what is civil society? I have with my sociologist friend Katja and so on, we discuss that all the time. We are nominalists today, and these creeps of nominalists think they just put a name on something, and whatever the name was, what its history is, it doesn't care. They think they can arbitrarily call something civil society, whatever they think it's a civil society, they say it. So in reality, we have a real historical development, and we should adjust our consciousness to what has really happened. So the family produced food, the family produced clothing, the family was a consumer unit and was a productive unit. That was true with the farmer still. The farmer worked outside in the fields, and the woman worked in the kitchen, and so on and so on. And the family did everything. Then suddenly in the city-states, not in the village, but in the city-state, particularly in the city-states, the shoes were not made in the family anymore. Or the family made more shoes than they used, a surplus of shoes. And then they learned it so well that they produced more and more shoes for more and more people, and the other people stopped producing shoes. And slowly they separated the shoemaking operation from the family and put it into another building and made a little shoe house, or slowly a little shoe factory, which was first manufacture, and the manufacture changed into industry. So there, between the family and the state, developed something ominous. This civil society, it is far from being harmless. The word civil is hiding the incivility which is really present in this, but an unbelievable dynamic type of a process. So the baker, the same thing. My grandfather was a farmer and was a baker, and the bakery is still in the farm. But the next step is that they produce outside. Somebody specializes in making bread. The others don't have to do the bread anymore. And soon you have a bread factory. And with the bread factory, you have owners of the bread factory. And you have workers of the bread factory. And you have stoves which somebody owns and the others don't own. And then you have modernity. And then you have, of course, all the problems which come then, including praying and Our Father, give us our daily bread. When you say, give us our daily bread, that means let it rain, that the corn will grow, and don't make it dry because I don't have any corn and nothing to eat. But now mediation sets in between those fields, wherever they are, in Central America or here or whatever, and the one who eats the bread on the table at home. There is now mediation in between. There are still the farmers, and the farmer becomes agriculture and agribusiness, and the little farmers are all dying out. They are still a million years die out, and so then becomes agribusiness, and that agribusiness is connected with bread factories all over the place in the big cities with thousands of workers which need investments for Wall Street, and then you have the profiteering. And suddenly when people have nothing to eat anymore, it's not because it rained or didn't rain or whatever, but it is there because somebody was striking, because the salary was not high enough, or for somebody the profit was not high enough and he produced the necessary scarcity. Or suddenly there is a depression and they overproduced bread because they had not planned for it, and so suddenly all the bread has to be thrown out together with the milk into the streets. That's what you have in 29 there. When suddenly the farmers put their milk into the streets and threw their bread out and so on. That is now where we are. That is where the ecological problem is suddenly born. So it was not always there. The whole mechanism of the bourgeois mind is to project it back. It was always with us. This mechanism puts people at peace. When people are said, no, that's not new, but it was always with us, then it's okay. You'll see when the news comes, a catastrophe happens, that's always happening. These people are always doing that. You know, a few weeks ago, 2 or 3 scientists in Iran were killed by the following method. Somebody with a motorcycle and a bomb put the bomb on the car and zoop, was speeding away. So 3 scientists were killed. Everybody made Mossad responsible for it. Now today, in India, a motorcyclist comes with a bomb, puts it on a Jewish car, and it blows up. And the same thing happened in another country and so on. And the Jewish was a diplomat, so a woman, I think, and was burned up or whatever. So I don't think she died. So now, how do you handle a catastrophe like this? It's the lex talionis. It's the law of retaliation, which is in the Torah. Jesus tried to repress it. It was not very successful. It's in the Holy Quran and so on. So, but what people will say then, you know, these things are happening all the time, or the Jews do this all the time, or the Iranians, these evil devils, they are doing this all the time. So we calm our consciousness and the conscience of the masses by the mass media and by the culture industry. We calm ourselves down by saying that it is somewhat regular. It has always happened. What we don't want is that something happens which has not happened before, because that would be really ruinous. That would really be shocking. The rabbi down there, my good friend, the little rabbi down on the congregation of Moses, he hates prophets because these prophets always make noise. They destroy the equilibrium. They upset everybody. So he's happy that the prophetic time is over once and for all. And he does not want to be a prophet, and he doesn't want to have anything to do with them. So, nevertheless, this is how to deal with newness. So, but we must admit that the ecological problem is one of the many new problems. So, fundamentalism is also a new problem. We are surrounded by things which haven't been there before. And that is why we have to take it so seriously. So, the high cultures. So, in the high cultures before or around that time, also, let's see, civil society does not happen when these high cultures start. But when they move on and the city-states grow, like the city-state of Nineveh or Sodom and so on, then slowly that process sets in. This process where industries are developed. First manufacture, very primitive and simple, but slowly through the centuries they grow more and more. So by 3500 we have the beginning of the Mesopotamian culture, Euphrates and Tigris, the city of Ur, where Abraham came from, and all 3 Abrahamic religions, And Baghdad, where we just are, that is the oldest high civilization with high cultures of Marduk and the Babylonian Genesis, which some of you know, and so on. So that is 3,500. By 3,000, we have then the Egyptian culture along the Nile River. You see that these cultures are always along rivers there in order to use river energy, the wind to blow their little boats, sailboats, and so on. So, and also mills, water mills, and so on. Traffic to other towns, and so on. So we have the Euphrates and Tigris.
The High Church that sent Romero to Salvador? We talked about the High Church.
No, Romero, you mean?
Yes,
Archbishop Romero?
yes,
No, he's a Roman Catholic bishop.
yes.
He
So
became an
was it-
archbishop.
So when he was in Salvador, he realized the role of the High Church and the Low Church. The High Church was for
No, he's a Roman Catholic.
Yes.
In the Roman Catholic, we have no high church or low church. That's only in the Anglican Church.
Well, when we watched
Yeah.
Romero movie, he said, here's an example of how the High Church works for the
Well, I mean,
bourgeois.
we wouldn't say high church, then we would say, you know, the bishops, you know, the bishop, the high clergy. The higher clergy, lower clergy. The priest here is lower clergy.
Oh, not synonymous with High Church, Low Church then?
No, that's only in England that we use those concepts. But you have in the Roman Catholic Church, you have the higher clergy, which are the bishops, the cardinals, and so on, the Pope, and then you have the low clergy, that's here, and so on. Okay, so.
So the High Church and Salvador was catering to
Right.
the bourgeois people, the
Right,
army generals
right,
and the
Right,
landlords. and
so,
the 1%.
okay, that brings us, you know, what civil society is doing to religion, right? So, civil society in itself, you know, what we have with greed and so on, you know, they destroy themselves, so we have this finance capital crisis now, which continues still, and where we pay billions of dollars of tax money, and the Chinese gave us billions and so on, we paid that to the banks, and so the people on the right think, you know, we should have left it to the market, we should have let them go under, you know, but if we had let them go under, I mean, that would have been a catastrophe, you know, we would have 3 times more unemployment, the banks would have to close, and so on. I mean, Bush started nationalization of the banks. That was nobody on the right or the left in this country could have done anything else. You could not let these banks on which all the pensions and all the employment and all the food and so depends to leave that to the market and let them go bankrupt or whatever, or let them go under. Okay, so, but let's see what civil society, it also destroys then, of course, the church or religion in a certain sense. So Rome has blamed for these thousands of child abuse, clerical child abuse, partially, mostly homosexual, to some small percentage also heterosexual, on civil society. That means that the porno business, when the seminarians go to seminary, they are already exposed to all that for 20 years or 18 years or whatever, and that all comes out. Therefore, this complete breakdown of discipline in the church and in the clergy and so on. So, but what is much worse is, you know, the poem by Nietzsche, that God is dead. And he describes it as this man, the madman, and he comes to the marketplace. In civil society, it's the marketplace, and with a lantern, and said, "Where is God?" And then he says, "God is dead." And then he says, "We have killed him." Who has killed him? Who is the we? We is civil society. Civil society has killed God long before there were socialists and so on. So that means also the very core, not only discipline in the church, but also its very theology is destroyed formally by the introduction of deism by Voltaire and Rousseau, and our constitution is deistic, our Declaration of Independence is deistic. The creator God is not the God of Abraham, it's not the God of Moses, not the God of Jesus. He is a God who has created and then left the world to itself, and that means for all practical purposes, the world, that means civil society, is atheistic, and God is worldless. God is worldless, and civil society is godless. And therefore we can go into time analysis there, we can see what happens from day to day in terms of culture war, and we step by step we see how civil society secularizes all its laws. There is no divorce in Christianity. Suddenly from 1880 on, all the societies changed their laws and divorce is possible and so on. And so now we have 6 or 7 states which have homosexual unions and so on. All 3 Abrahamic religions negate homosexual relations and so on. So step by step by step, abortion and euthanasia and eugenics and so on. There is not one point where there is an agreement. Why? Because civil society secularizes itself further and further. That means they kill God further and further. It's not a static thing, it's a dynamic thing all the time. So now, what we are concerned with now here is the time diagnosis, is that there were no ecological problems before there was a civil society. Even in civil society for many hundreds of years, the industry was not on the level, shoemakers, car makers and so on, manufacture and so on a level where they could really disturb the equilibrium, where they could open up this hole there where sun radiation, ozone hole there where the radiation could come in. They did not really pollute rivers and so on. It had needed 17 paper mills here to destroy the environment. So if there had only been 1 or 2, it wouldn't have done that terrible harm and so on. So it depends on the quantity of that thing which is between the family and the state. And it depends on the strength of the state to control the environment, to control civil society. Now, we have already, before when you think of great philosophers, Plato. Plato saw the problem. He saw that the civil society in Athens with the sophists and so on was destroying the whole state organization. The sophists were dialecticians in a subjective way, and they turned over justice into injustice, and they defended the guilty, and they put the innocent in prison and so on. So when he saw how civil society destroyed the beautiful Athenian state, he wrote then against civil society. He wrote in his Utopia of the State and then in the Laws later on how civil society has to be repressed in order to rescue the state. And so that went into songs. You couldn't sing with it because many of our songs there are individualistic, they are atomistic, the civil society is atomistic, and thereby add to the disintegration of the state, of the citizenship, and so on. So poetry, he thought that all poets were liars, and so he wanted to regulate civil society, I think regulating out of its existence and so on. And this attempt goes up to Lenin and into the socialistic revolution in Russia, in spite of the fact that they did not have the type of civil society. Tonight we had a discussion with Katja about Bismarck. She thought that this, labor union struggles and anti-socialism and so on didn't exist yet at the time of Bismarck, and then she Googled. She always Googles against me. I am the Google victim all day long. So she Googled the whole thing, and she did find that what I had told her about anti-socialism laws and so on. Only Russia was far backward. So that means England was ahead in the whole process. It had the first depression, where thousands of people died in the depression. It was the most industrialized country. It has the most colonies. It built the empire and so on. And then the next was France, and the next was Germany. That was Bismarck and the struggle against labor unions. That means what we don't have yet, a universal health insurance, he had that by 1875 or 1880. Not because he had a good heart or whatever, but because he wanted to kill the socialists. The socialists had promoted it, and he wanted to take the wind out of their sails, and so he did it so that they wouldn't do it. The same thing for Social Security and health insurance and so on. By the way, also in our country, we are not so backward as these people there. I wrote to the priest, the more this town goes to the right, the more stupid people get, and therefore we don't find intelligent people anymore. Because the first Roosevelt saw all that already. He's had behind him 100 years of depressions in which people died and during the depression, and where then there was a lack of labor force and labor was too expensive. That could even every stupid capitalist could see that. Then when the people died during the Depression, when they got out of the Depression and the inventory went down, then the labor prices would go up. So therefore England had the social legislation then in Parliament, which Marx studied and so on. But Roosevelt also was mayor of New York. And he saw how lower Manhattan stood up all the people in those horrible tenement houses, which were worse than any African or German concentration camp, that they marched up to upper Manhattan and burned down all the houses of the owners. So, and then he was mayor there, and he regulated the whole thing and got them quiet again, but he also learned something from that. And he recommended health insurance for all Americans. And he recommended control of civil society by federal law. And still now today there are these people there of this on this, what is this movement there?
Tea Party?
Tea Party, who still think all that is not necessary or all that should be privatized and so on. It is out of one's imagination how something like that can run around. And I'm not against the individual people because they are all quite harmless people. They are on Medicare and at the same time are against Medicare. This is so insane that one cannot even grasp it. And it has something to do with our education system. We do not educate people, or they don't want to be educated. Something is happening. So, nevertheless, so the civil society is where we have to start the analysis of the ecological problem. So, but then in detail now, what has to be done, that is what we have to go into it, right? So the timeline should help us to get a certain perspective, you know, that it is new, but it is also not completely new, right? So there were chimneys in England for, throughout the 18th century. The Industrial Revolution, what we call the Industrial Revolution, was a revolution which was going on for a long time, but then through the revolution in science and application of technology, we became more and more chemical, used more and more physics, more and more science, and the more that happened, the more the equilibrium of the environment was disturbed in terms of other animals and in terms of also our own organism. How a worker is sitting there for 8 hours or standing at the assembly line. I taught once in trade schools in Germany for a little while. And then I went to the factory where my students were working. And I saw them sitting there, the girls and the boys and so on. And I went to the owner then and I said, you know, can we maybe do something about this, that they can, maybe every hour they can stand up and can go around the next room and then do some things where they do something with one hand rather than the other hand. They use the one hand there, they can use the other hand there, or maybe they can stand up, or maybe they can pull this thing, or whatever. And can we not do something to show them how their room hangs together with the other room, how their factory hangs together with another factory, and with other types of industries, and how they all make a contribution to the reproduction of this civil society of which we are all a part and so on. No, it was not cost effective. I had horrible things with those bastards and so on. But they could not do that. They had to sit there and they did not care about what happens to the body and the one-sidedness, that one arm is used all the time for 8 hours or 10 hours or whatever. So this is where we have to get into. There we'll also have the difficulties, you know, the bottom line, the cost effectiveness and so on. And it goes into details of biology, into details of economics and so on. Yes.
No one company can do it if the whole system doesn't do it.
Right, that's another thing. Yeah, they all hang together and they compete
You can
with
have
others.
very humane
Right.
employers,
Right.
but he has to consider the bottom line.
Mm-hmm. And we have humane employers like Owens and so on, and we know what happened to all of them. They got bankrupt, right? But now, when you take a system, you know, which is more friendly to the environment, like the kibbutzim, you know, the kibbutz system. And I went there and I lived there a little while, and I looked at how they produce. So, for instance, they have a glass factory. You know, they don't make glass in the families. They have some kind in these kibbutzim. They have a civil society. They have a production section and they can produce, let's see, 10,000 windows, and they decide they will only produce 5,000 windows, because 5,000 windows, the profit they make when they sell them is sufficient for everybody, and so they shorten the labor hours. That means people are sitting there and cutting glass less time than they could. If they were driven by the profit motive, then they would go all out and produce 10,000 windows, take all the glass out or the material which they need to make glass and so on, which would in fact, of course, influence the environment. And then also the bodies of the people. Instead of that, these people can then do sports, they can hop around, they can go swimming, they can do photography, they can do art, they can make music, and so on. So it can be done, and in Central, in Eastern Europe, in the communist countries, like in the German Democratic Republic, there were similar things like in the kibbutzim, but they canceled private property, and so it belongs to all of them. And now, of course, the state of Israel was supposed to become, the Zionists wanted to have a socialistic kibbutzim state. That means instead of civil society, you would have the kibbutzim, and then you would have a state, and which would be carried by the kibbutzim. Instead of that, Tel Aviv was developed, and with the stuff, gold and so on, which came out of South Africa, and they began to use that material and sold it in Holland on the market and so on, and it became slowly a capitalistic thing. And this kibbutzim thing, which was healthy and did not ruin the environment, that was pushed back and back further and further. And we have 150,000 kibbutzim people still. So they had to say, every Jew has to serve, women and boys, girls and boys, and they have to serve for 3 years in the army. So then the kibbutz said, okay, you go to Tel Aviv now, and you see what it means to live in a capitalistic society, the selfishness, the whore business, the whole porno business, and so on. And then you make a decision if you want to live in that civil society out there, or if you want to come back to us voluntarily. And you will not be degraded, like when you left the priesthood or monastery, people always look down on you, and that happened in the kibbutzim too. You were some kind of a traitor, nothing of this anymore. But if you come back, you have to be totally committed. So they will pay you a study as a doctor, medical doctor. They send you to Paris, for studying philosophy or whatever. You get the best education, they pay everything. And then you have to obligate yourself to be a doctor for this kibbutzim. You get no income for doing that work. But if you want to have a car, you have a car. If you want to have a house, you have a house. If you want to go to vacations, the most beautiful places, they will pay for everything. But there will be no private property. There's the property of the 1,500 people. I ate breakfast with them, maybe 1,500, maybe 2,000, and they have all the property in common. They have their children in common. They sometimes make changes. The children now can come home overnight. They couldn't. They slept in the kindergarten. They put their old people into the center of the kibbutzim, so they aren't so lonely like here. One wonderful woman there in our Saturday, she gave me a Valentine's card, and she said, we old people, nobody remembers us anymore. So the loneliness of old people, which you have here, is not there. Every morning, the grandchildren go through the middle of the village and see their grandmother and grandfather before they go to school and so on. So professors in the different universities, only 3 or so, they think that through. They live in the kibbutzim, are professors in the university, and then, arrange things for the old people, for the young people, and so on and so on, the whole cultural activity, and they are blooming, they were blooming. So, but the more Israel became a state, a bourgeois state, a capitalistic state, the more they needed cheap labor from the Palestinians, and then the whole thing started, and 5 wars come out of this. That is the usual thing of the development of civil society. You cannot have a civil society and make it peaceful. There will be one war after the other until the thing is decided. So, and then they became, of course, a fortress of the United States. $2 million a day they cost. And they have the bombs, several bombs. Of course. So now when they have a bomb, and India has an Indian bomb, and Pakistan has a bomb, then of course Iran wants to have a bomb. Then suddenly Iran is not supposed to have a bomb. Why not? And so on. Then the whole thing becomes chaotic. And so that is civil society. So if we don't see that, it does not make even sense to talk about this. In the Nazi time, the Nazis had wonderful ecology, you know. There we had to gather the paper, and this has to be in this box and that box and so on. And the electricity had to be taken off and so on. And also the bodies, the gymnastics and so on. The Nazis were wonderful ecologists, you know. But because they restrained civil society, and so did the Stalin and so on. But as soon as civil society comes in, or as soon as the state, even a socialistic state, cannot regulate civil society adequately, then among many other problems, then its ecology problem will come in terms of illnesses of the body, as well as, now go to in Indiana there, what is that town before Chicago there, with all the chemical industry? Gary, Indiana, you know. I mean, take a picture of this. This is hell. And there are these working houses, these little houses, and the smoke all over the thing, you know. I lost my road once, as I usually do, and I was in the middle of this whole miserable place there, you know. I mean, how people can even breathe there is not understandable, you know. So, and there are innumerable places like this. So, but we see how it has evolved, right? And so what one would have to do in order to the Green people, the Green Party, in Germany is not in power now, but they, of course, made some kind of a difference in Germany, and they are still a force even when they are not in the government at this moment. The people who are in the government, the liberals and the Christians, they had to learn from them, you know. So, and we have Green Party people here too. They don't play any role there in the election process, but there are people who think that way, but they don't come through. So I think we can come through only if people can be educated about where they are, you know. What liberalism is the philosophy of civil society. It is atomistic. It was obsolete already by 1827, the First Depression. It collapsed totally because suddenly there were masses of people who had no work and were dying, and there were no things. And liberalism is good in terms of individuals and letting them do what they want to do. But as soon as collective problems come up, like New Orleans or whatever, it does not work. Take the thing, you know, what a Roosevelt liberal would have done if he had been in the White House about New Orleans. There you have nature rebelling. That means it was very hot, and when it's very hot, then of course the clouds get denser and more, and so on and so on. So Bush had an unbelievable weather problem, moving slowly to New Orleans. Now, if he had still had in his brain the principle of subsidiarity, which was the core of the New Deal, which was a social modification of liberalism, then he would have said, New Orleans cannot handle that. The buses there, which they have, the school buses, cannot handle that. We have to subsidize, subsidiarity principle. We have to help. The two states which were affected will not handle that. We have to bring the federal government in. We may even have to ask help. We may have to get doctors from Cuba. Cuba offered 1,000 doctors for nothing. They were rejected because they were communists. Venezuela wanted to send cheap oil, and so we did take that. So, so you need subsidiarity, and liberalism, if it is not modified, then even if it's modified, it's difficult enough. So if the president had had that Roosevelt liberalism and not the other one, he would have said, we have these pontoons, we have these cars which have wheels and can swim. There are thousands of them still from the Second World War standing in the desert. One can mobilize them. They can drive through the streets, and when the water comes, they can swim. Instead of that, they send 3 helicopters going around picking the cats up from some roofs and so on. The whole world says this America is high-tech, you know, and they cannot handle this. Why not? Because in his head, the fish thinks first. And when the fish thinks in his head, it stinks all over the place, and ecological problems cannot be solved. That is the issue. So you have a little example there. So even if you have high tech, you cannot settle things because something is missing in the brain. A concept, a notion, without which we cannot see anything. That is how our mind is constructed. So if the issue of surplus value is not there in our students, they cannot see where they are. They cannot see that it's an injustice that they pay for the books, that they pay for their tuition. Nobody does around the globe anymore, except here, because they have castrated their brain so that they don't see their parents are not farmers anymore. They will not go home on the farm. They will not learn anything to improve the farm. They will not take care of their parents. Their houses will be too small. They cannot be their social security. They are only a blessing from God. Otherwise, they are absolutely useless. But who is the beneficiary of my 7 children? The corporations are the beneficiary, who made no contribution whatsoever and get everything out of them. They get a little salary on, maybe a big salary on Monday, which pays for the whole week, and the rest of the week they work for free for their capitalistic master. So if this category is missing in his head, then the environment will go wrong. That is also for family life. If one has the wrong notion about family life and violates fundamental rules which are at work there, independent for our brain, which we are not constructing, as the idiots say all the time. They construct everything all day long. Some things are constructed. The law of gravity is a construct, but when you jump from the building, your head will bash in, because the law of gravity, if you construct it or don't construct it or whatever, it will be there. So while there is construction, there is also reality which is constructed and which does do its very own thing. So all this, is so, but this thing that we cannot solve the ecological problem if we don't get the stink out of the heads, and if we don't concentrate on what the structure of civil society is, how it is developed, and where it stands now, and what has to be changed in order to do that. Now, a lot of things, the scientists look at the trees, but they don't see the forest. They're very good at the trees, and the forest is missing. So they don't see the wholeness of things. And that is why they can help us only to some extent with the ecological problem. Very precious help, and it's not possible without it. But as the example of Plato shows, a philosopher is a psychoanalyst of a whole civilization. In a certain sense, he puts the whole civilization on the couch, and therefore knows where the cancer is. The cancer is in civil society. Plato could not heal the Greek society. Civil society destroyed the city-state. Civil society destroyed all city-states. That is why you have the prophets calling about Nineveh. That means where civil society becomes more and perverse, the prophet comes in and asks that they repent. That means that they adjust themselves again to the wholeness of nature, to the wholeness of their body, because they have become perverse, they have become idiotic. So it was in Sodom, in Gomorrah, and so on. And so sometimes it helps, and if it does not help, in Nineveh it did help. Jonas preached, and then they converted. They gave up civil society, and he was angry about this, and he had trouble with God. He said, you sent me there to tell them that everything's wrong with them, and then now look, they survive. I told them they go under, but they don't go under. So the whale or whatever swallowed him up and spit him out again, but he rejoined Nineveh again, and was a good citizen for the rest, but the problem was solved. The problem is solvable. You have it also in Babylonian thing with the towers of these were temples, but then, as our preachers say on television all the time, there was one tower where man put himself on top, and then Yahweh punished them by spreading the languages, and nobody could understand anybody anymore. All these, like one of the rabbis told us recently, he said, it doesn't matter to me if the stories are true, the meaning is important, and he was right. This positivistic insanity that one wants to know if the Egyptian darkness was real or not, that is idiotic. The question is the message which is in these stories. They have something to do with the catastrophe which civil society produces when it is not restrained. If people were real Jews, real Christians, real Muslims, they would be all on the side of sharp government control of all what civil society does, because otherwise it commits suicide and pulls the family and the church and the culture and itself into the abyss. That is the problem which we have now, and that's also the validity of all these myths. They may or may not be factual. You can ask Hansel and Gretel, for instance, you know, did that really happen? No, it didn't happen. Is Hansel and Gretel true, psychoanalytically and otherwise? Yes, it is true. Therefore, you can sometimes say that there is more truth in the religious illusions than there is in the science which wants to destroy them, or has destroyed them already. So that is, but you see that the ecological problem branches out into many other issues, and people need a good education in order to see the connection. And not only a scientific one, but I think also a philosophical type of an education where they can see the wholeness. And when we look at the contemporary issues for a while there, we may be able to analyze that. Yeah, David.
I think the main force behind the occupiers is the mantra of the fish stinks first in its head. I think that global consciousness is starting to put society, civil society, on the couch.
That's what they try to do, yeah.
I think that
I think so. There are many different people, you know, many different philosophies and so on. But they are, now they all have gone home. They destroyed the camp in Washington by force recently. And, but they will come back. And their function is not to overthrow the ruling class. That is what would have to happen. But they at least identify the ruling class, so that Americans don't think we live in a free country or whatever. But they know that the few rule the country, as it was under feudalism, as it was under slavery. And they are different, of course. They are not slaveholders. They are not feudal lords.
What can we hope for with the
Well,
occupied consciousness?
that in an educational process, people become aware that we do have a ruling class. What one wants to do about it is the same ruling class which won the war, the Civil War. It means the ruling class which annihilated the ruling class of the South in order to rescue the Union. And now they are in charge of the Union. And they will remain in charge of the Union as long as nobody knows that they're there. That means people think the CEO, we saw it in the movie, you know, there's this CEO and he wants to attack the CEO. That CEO of General Motors was fired after the movie was made. Who fires the CEO? The owners fire him. Well, first of all, there's a group of people, of course, which regulate the whole thing first, but behind that they are the owners, and they are not visible, and you cannot have no access to them. And so he did not even have access to the CEO. He could not talk to that guy. You know, he went to the hotel, he went to the country club, and he couldn't even see him.
Roger Smith.
Well, yeah, Roger. And so that is, you know, that is part of the story, what this group can do, that movement can do, and has done already, you know. But that is only a small step, you know, because to see how they function, you know, how they move their lawyers from the corporation into the government, from the government into the corporation, back and forth. So when they are in the state, they know how the corporation functions. When they are in the corporation, and then they know how the government functions. And they know how they can evade the government and so on. So that is fatal. That is fatal. Obama put people from Wall Street who commit horrendous crimes right into his government. And then after that, they go back again. Cheney, for instance, got $25 million when he moved from his corporation over into the government. And he worked well in the government for them. And then they go back again, you know, back and forth. And in both cases, they make horrendous money. So all this has to be looked through, and every step in that learning curve where people can learn how civil society functions, that the country is not ruled from Washington, the country is ruled from New York. Also that a man who is rather decent, I think that Obama is a decent fellow, who was converted to Christianity with Reverend Wright in Chicago. And so, but why a decent man like this cannot do more than he's doing? that is what one has to learn, that it is very hard, that the president is not the most powerful man in the world, but that he is hooked. And that if he doesn't obey, he will be assassinated, like Kennedy was assassinated, like his brother was assassinated, like Martin Luther King was assassinated, like Avis was assassinated, like Malcolm X was assassinated. That means the liberal, unrestrained liberals are rough guys, you know, as Clinton and so on know very well. They are dangerous. And they practically annihilated the whole Roosevelt leadership before they went over to the Chicago school and rejected Keynesianism and did this deregulation, which then led us into the disaster. And now they say that we should not have bailed them out. What the hell do they think this country would be like if they had not been bailed out? If the central banks would all have collapsed, and the industry is not having any investments would have collapsed as well. What do they... That means they obviously have no idea what the country, how the country is structured or how it is governed. Right, so, I mean, if this group, and it's a worldwide movement, by the way, because the power elite, you know, has become international. And so, therefore, to show, when I came to Frankfurt, I had the same thing, you know, same take over Wall Street. But in Frankfurt, there's the Frankfurt Börse, where I worked once, and they concentrate on that. And so, see, so this type of an enlightenment, but more than that, they cannot do. So, if we vote the president in again, which probably will happen because the other side is so goddamn stupid, what has happened with Lincoln's party, you know, it's just ununderstandable. So he will just come into by default, no matter what he does, because there's nobody there who could even come close to him. So, but if he comes in again, so then one must not put one's expectations too high. The president is not the most powerful man in the country. He is ruled by the people who own Wall Street, and he has to obey them. And if he doesn't obey them, he will be either assassinated or, like Nixon, is thrown out. He must be popular. He must be the nice face of the ruling class. It is like when I was in the prison camp in Norfolk there. We had a German who ruled the whole country, the whole prison camp. He did the work for the people who were really in power. That was the army outside. He did their work, right? In the concentration camps, you had Jews, governing Jews. There was a Jewish police. There was a Jewish orchestra, which played when people went to work. There were Jewish people who selected the people for the gas chamber and who cleaned them up after they came out of the gas chamber. So you let people do their own thing. That is it. So what Wall Street wants is, you know, a popularity concept. It must be a guy who, you know, gets good response from the masses. So the masses have the feeling it's a nice face, and he smiles nicely and dances nicely. Put the Christmas tree up on the thing there in the White House, and so on and so on. That's all he does. But he cannot remove the power elite. He cannot stop them. He can not put them on trial. The Bush administration should be put on trial. In a national trial here at home, we don't have the guts. There is no will. The president, even whatever his conscience is as a lawyer, he knows that they commit horrendous crimes. They started 2 wars against international law. They should be put on trial. They should be sent to Den Haag. But nobody sends them. So they will, you know, if you define religion as the longing that the murderer shall not triumph over his innocent victim, at least not ultimately. For the time being, they are all triumphing over their 1 million people who are buried in the deserts, whom they burned to death, and so on. With innumerable mothers with babies inside of them, and so on. And the same people who are against abortion, and so on, have no problem with this. So, but, you know, he cannot do this. So the question is what people can expect. They can expect, at best, you know, that he will do what Mr. Roosevelt did and what his wife did. But the wife could promote social rationality only under the War Powers Act, and after a legitimate declaration of war by Congress, then the president was busy with the 2 wars, and she did all kinds of beautiful things, you know, in the shadow of this social issues. And shortly before he died, he established some kind of a new human rights catalog, you know, with human rights which then were fulfilled in Japan and Germany, but not here. So that is our problem. See, so these are the circumstances under which the ecological problems have to be solved in terms of an ecology of nature, as the Pope would say, and an ecology of man as well, which means his body, his own body, in terms of drugs, in terms of sex, in terms of healthy food and diet, and all the whole food industry and so on would be looked at and all this. Okay?
Should we put a film in, Rudy?
Yeah, where are we now time-wise? So we have this time diagnosis, and I hope
12
that
minutes.
this helps us a little bit to think about this. What time is it?
About 12 minutes, that's all we have
Oh,
left.
okay, so then we want to have one of these movies there. What we want to look at SICO is at the ecological factor in that, which is interesting. We saw it the last time. We saw General Motors. We saw what it did to his father, who was at the assembly line for 30 years, and what it did to the environment out with smoke and all this. And so we want to look at another one. So that's our perspective. It doesn't matter if we saw that already or if we like our friend there who made the movies, who is raised by the St. Joseph Sisters and has a lot of this Catholic spirit in there. It doesn't show outside. There are secular movies, but there is some motivation at work there. And let's see if we see the ecological factor or not. What he shows us is civil society. It's American civil society in Flint, in Kalamazoo, in Detroit, in Washington, and so on. That is civil society at its most extreme development ever. That is our problem. The civil society in Babylon, in Europe, or whatever, was nothing in compared to that. Civil society grew tremendously, and the state did not evolve. The states did not evolve, and the federal government did not evolve. Already saying government, it's only a part of the state. The state is the free association of citizens who continue to decide their fate together freely. That is the state, but not just the government or whatever. Okay, let's see if we see something. We want to look at civil society, but we want to look specifically of the ecological factor in this civil society. If we see something, maybe we don't.
I think, Dr. Siebert, we can say at least the last 10 presidents have seen 10,000 double agents, circulating between government and big
the
business or
corporation.
capital,
Right, yeah.
in full
But, I
light,
mean,
in the full light of day. They don't have to hide themselves.
Right. I mean, the lobby is quite visible. You know, you have to register as a lobbyist and so on. So you know what they pay and whom they invite and all that. That's visible, but it is much more intrinsic.
Too many OBGYNs aren't able to practice their
Now, he should
love
be
with
in
women all
prison now.
across the
Instead
country.
of that, he sits around there, jumps out of the
I love
sky.
that one.